Hi, I'm Sarah from Talkly.co.uk and I'm here with you today with another video lesson for IGCSE First Language English, looking at the highly requested directed writing. I feel like every other comment is like, directed writing, how do I evaluate? So, okay, fine, I'm here. I'm going to do that with you. So we are doing this as a write-along. So I'm literally going to be writing an answer and talking you through my process. And if you would like to write along with me, then the question paper that you will need is October-November 2023, paper 21. I'll try to put a link in the description. Hopefully I remember. If I don't remember, someone comment and remind me to do that. So we're going to do it as a write-along or just watch and listen to my writing process. Let's get going then. So the first thing that I would always do is we've got to look at the question first and analyse the VORP. Okay? So VORP meaning voice, audience, register, purpose and format. So let's just read it first of all. Imagine that you are a student of a school which is considering whether or not to demolish an old building on its site. Write the speech you give to a meeting of local people expressing your views. In your speech, you should evaluate the ideas, attitudes and opinions about buildings given in both texts. Based on what you have read, justify your own views on whether the school's old building should be replaced or reused. Base your speech on what you have read in both texts, but be careful to use your own words. Address both of the points. Okay, so I am a student. That is my voice. My audience is local people. By that I'm going to assume it means adults. Audience, adults. Register, therefore, is going to be relatively formal. Even though I'm a student, if I'm speaking to adults, for them to take me seriously, I'm going to have to try to speak on their level. Purpose is to express my views, and it doesn't sound like I need to pick a particular side because it's saying justify my views on whether the building should be replaced or reused. So that's suggesting two possible options, and whether or not to demolish a building. So it's not saying that I have to argue a particular side. So therefore I think it's going to be quite balanced and to discuss both sides. Whereas you might have other papers that are like, give a speech explaining why the building should be demolished or why it should be reused. This one is saying both sides, so we're going to be a bit more balanced. And then finally, the format is a speech. So in a speech you can be a little bit more emotive. You have to talk directly to a live audience. And you could be a bit more rhetorical in your language choices. Okay, so I've analysed my VORP. So from this, I know that the topic is going to be all about whether or not we should demolish a building on a school site, and I'm going to have to be balanced. So I'm going to look for reasons for and against, whether it should be replaced or reused, and possible counter arguments of each of them. Okay, so now that I've done that, I am going to go over to my past paper and I'm going to read. So my tactic as I'm reading through, there are two different things that you need to look out for, right? The first one is explicit ideas. So like literally, what are the arguments that are being made in this text? Explicitly, what points are being made in the text? So just like summarising what someone else says to show that you understand the basic literal meaning. And then the second one is evaluating implicit ideas, which is like the things that are suggested but not said. And that might be a reason why it's a good idea and developing that kind of reasoning, or it might be counter arguing and suggesting, why it might not be such a good reason. And it could also be taking some of these ideas which aren't about schools, but then the implicit things that are suggested about them, applying it to schools and to a school context. So a few different ways that you can evaluate there. Basically, like, students are always like, what does evaluation mean? It's this prodding an idea and examining it from all different angles and directions. And in some papers that might be very simply an effective counter argument. In other papers that might be developing or extending the idea or applying the idea in a new context. So let's read through this paper and see what we've got in this particular case then. Text A, we should replace all buildings with new, better ones. Many older buildings, including some of our homes, schools and offices, were designed and constructed for very different generations, with completely different expectations in terms of lifestyle, comfort, connectivity and energy efficiency. So these are some explicit ideas. Houses were built for different purposes across the different generations, and that there are going to be differences in how we live our lives, the level of comfort we expect, how connected we are. I'm assuming that might mean to the internet, but it might also mean like to local infrastructure, and energy efficiency, assuming that modern houses are now more energy efficient. Place in a school building, I wonder if like comfort is quite an important factor for school students, if these old buildings don't allow students to concentrate very well because they're uncomfortable, or like not spreading the right message to students if they're not very energy efficient, and yet teachers are trying to talk about climate change to them. Empty historic buildings that were once local landmarks now get in the way of new projects, such as repurposing of land for parks, shops and recreational space that might offer more benefit to the community. This idea of benefit to the community versus history. Could they not use these empty historic buildings and just repurpose them for the community so that they're not empty anymore? Like, does it have to really be replaced? Can it not be like some sort of like middle ground? Like upgrade the historic buildings rather than destroy them. Buildings often outlive their original purpose. Even when they're still in use, the enormous costs, so financial issues, of repairing some very old buildings can be prohibitive, so they can become shabby and unsightly. Is the value of something really in how attractive it is? So how are we valuing these buildings? Some older buildings may still look good on the outside but have underlying problems such as poor ventilation, outdated wiring or problems with the plumbing. Well, these are all things that could be fixed, surely. Old buildings tend to develop weaker foundations thanks to the materials used in their construction, degrading to the point where the structure becomes unstable or unsafe. Well, clearly if the foundation is weak and things are unsafe, then they should be destroyed. But if it's just a case of they're unsightly, then they should be fixed. So finding that middle ground, I would say, there. Constructing new environmentally friendly green buildings, which can be designed for flexibility of purpose, is the obvious answer. Green buildings use as little energy as possible, generate their own power, recycle water and can cool or heat themselves without the need for air conditioning or central heating. They also take into account how they affect the people living and working in them. Can some of these like techniques not be applied to all buildings, like more insulation? The goal is to build more buildings that are physically healthy for people, says award-winning architect Joy Yang. Numerous studies show how a healthy building can reduce illness and absenteeism among workers, and increase worker productivity, raise test scores among students and lead to greater workplace satisfaction. So all of this suggests that if you were a student, maybe you would get better grades, less illnesses, or like students who are missing a lot of school might then become present. So think about how these ideas here, although they're about workers, could relate to school students as well. Modern software enables architects and engineers to visualize and calculate increasingly complex shapes. Designs are no longer limited by practicalities. Weird and wonderful modern buildings in natural shapes are springing up, driven by cities' desires to outdo each other. A football stadium in the shape of a giant flower, or an office development shaped like a mountain range. So that could increase student creativity if maybe they could be involved in the design of the building. We are trying to change how people think about buildings. Yang says we must recognise that our cities are not museums, but living and evolving centres of commerce and culture. Okay, sure, but doesn't there have to be a balance between green buildings, like everything being modern and clean and comfortable, and protecting and preserving like history and legacy? So that's kind of like where I'm taking it. I think some of these things could be applied to students, but some of the arguments are a little bit weak in terms of, is that a good enough reason to destroy a historic landmark? Okay, and now on to text B. Don't forget we're thinking about reusing or repurposing a school building, so look out for anything here related to schools or that could be applied to schools. And I am also going to be thinking, like, how do these ideas interact with text A? Internationally, old buildings are considered valuable resources. They add charm and human scale to our cities and towns, attracting tourists and businesses and connecting us to our past. They should be protected. Okay, that's a good point. Connecting to our past. Could this be important for history students? Could it teach a lesson to students, a practical lesson? As populations grow and cities around the world become increasingly built up, interchangeable and bland, saving not just iconic or famous buildings, but those we have grown up with around us is critical. They are living history we can feel and touch. So this idea of, like, okay, we can have lots and lots of very, like, good buildings in terms of how you're measuring the buildings in terms of energy efficiency, but if we just end up with a city full of grey boxes, is that also what we want? Like, buildings can also be a form of artwork. And this idea of legacy, our history. Some people argue it is for the climate to demolish an old, energy-hungry building and build a well-insulated, sustainable replacement. Others argue we should try to find new life in old buildings. Adaptive use is a process that recycles old buildings for new uses while retaining many of their historic features. But older buildings have a far more enduring importance to society as educational examples than they do as modern dwellings or workplaces. So buildings about more than homes or work, but they're also educational too. Admittedly, through adaptive reuse, exciting new spaces have been created in likely old buildings, such as former factories, sewage silos and power stations. However, sometimes this is achieved by traditional restoration of just the building's exterior, and the interior is gutted to create room for the sort of amenities people expect in a new property. So the idea that if you are reusing and recycling a building, it shouldn't just be superficial. So not just like keeping the outside the same so that it looks beautiful to everyone looking from the outside, but that actually inside you're trying to restore as many period features as possible too. So you're not just doing it to look good, but you're also trying to genuinely keep as much as you possibly can. Whether this is relevant or possible depends on the history, significance and structure of the building itself. So you have to take it building by building. Is the school building one of importance? Is it possible to refurnish that building? So, and again, we don't know that because it doesn't say in the text, so we can make it up. Our school building possible, historical. I would suggest, to be honest, making your school building historical, because then it gives you something to say. Some buildings must be entirely restored or repaired sensitively at considerable expense before upgrading for contemporary use is possible. Repaired sensitively, considerable expense. Most successful projects are those that respect and retain the building's heritage and add contemporary features that provide value for the future. We see former warehouses transformed into attractive workplace environments with living green roofs or plants and grasses. Could we do that at the school? And disused theatres repurposed as open office spaces with their grand staircases retained to encourage physical activity. Sometimes adaptive use is the only way that the building's fabric be properly cared for while making better use of the building itself. When properly renovated to incorporate modern green technologies, old buildings can use even less energy than flashy new buildings that may take decades to save more emissions than were created during their construction. Okay, so the actual building of the new buildings. So if you're building an eco building, the building process isn't eco, right? Because you're probably still going to bring in concrete or something like that. Building in first place isn't environmentally friendly. So surely more environmentally friendly to restore what's already there than to completely demolish something that's there and then build again from scratch with all new materials, new foundations and so on. Okay, so now my next step is I need to just go back over and think, how are these two texts kind of interacting and how am I going to relate this to schools? So if we go back to the first one, we're basically thinking like, what are some arguments that we could add on to this in favour, and how can we relate this back to the school? So with the idea of safety, so with this idea of that the old buildings can become unstable or unsafe, I might say safety more important than history, sadly. Like, what's the point of having history if you're in a collapsed building and you die? There's no point then. And also with this idea of cost, right? The buildings are expensive. Well, if we keep them, they're only going to get more expensive because the buildings will only get older, therefore only get more expensive. Eventually we're going to have to deal with this problem over time. And then if we have a look at the second article, I might have like this idea of like, if you're actually going to preserve, then you actually need to like maintain the identity of the building and not just do it superficially. I might also say like it could be more imaginative, right, and more creative to actually recycle than just to keep building all of these bland buildings. So it's more creative, beautiful, imaginative. I'm really going to like put this idea of like history students, or this idea of teaching students eco values. Like, I bet so many schools have got assemblies and so on and so forth that teach the importance of environmentalism, and yet aren't they hypocrites if they then just destroy an old historical building and put up like a generic blonde eco-friendly box? So this idea of don't be a hypocrite, I think, will be an interesting one there too. And besides which, like, schools are also big recyclers. Like, what else is recycled in the school? Like bottles, paper, etc. So why not a building? Alright, so I've read both texts. I've got my explicit ideas highlighted, but I need to remember when I'm writing that I definitely need to put those into my own words. So you can't just copy from the text or you'll lose marks. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to write the introduction and first paragraph of my speech to give you an idea of like the style. So, hard to talk and write, so I hope you'll bear with me while I write out. Okay, so I'm a student and I'm writing a speech to local people. So the first bit of my speech then I'm going to have to like hook them in and say who I am. So I might say, thank you everyone gathered here today to listen to community arguments for preserving our beloved building of Knightsbridge High School, an architectural majesty built in 1609. Like many of you, I am filled with such inspiration when I walk through the gates to this beloved building each day, as a fortunate student of this esteemed establishment. So far, look, I'm really trying to make it clear I'm a student and I'm speaking to a live audience. So I've got thank you everyone, And I'm also using collective pronouns like our beloved building, like many of you. And then I've put in here as a fortunate student of this esteemed establishment to make it obvious that I am a student. I just want to engage with my audience a little bit more, and then I'll get started with the main body paragraph. So I'm going to say, so now I'm like directly addressing my audience, and I'm saying, how many of you are Knightsbridge alumni, previous Knightsbridge students? Ah, so many. So you can imagine as I'm giving the speech, maybe people are raising their hands. I know that the preservation of this piece of our shared history will be of great significance to you too. So here again, I'm directly addressing my audience, saying you, and I'm even asking them a question and imagining what their response might be. And then I'm bringing them along with me, then this piece of our shared history, again with those collective pronouns, and suggesting that it's also important to the speaker of the speech themselves. Do also notice you're a student of a school, give the school a name. So you can make one up, or you can just call it Knightsbridge High School. I always use that name for my schools. So feel free to make it up and think about what your school is called, and does it have a beautiful historical building, right? Because that kind of then gives you something to write about. Now on to my first main body paragraph. So I need to connect some of these ideas together between the two texts. And I haven't really thought about this actually, but let's see. My main body paragraphs, I might go something about education and hypocrisy, like actually teaching students about environmentalism without practicing what you preach is hypocritical, and we can use the school as the building as like this learning point for students. The next one might be about cost or finances, and the next one might be about benefits to students in terms of their learning and their comfort. In fact, let's go learning, comfort, and safety. And I need to remember to argue both sides. So I need to try not, I can already feel that I'm getting caught up in arguing in favour of recycling the building rather than destroying it. And I just need to reel myself back in and say, this is discussion, you're doing both sides. So I need to be careful. So each of my main body paragraphs will be about these three big topics. I'm only going to write this first one in this video lesson today because, guys, it's Sunday. I'm tired. Right. If you want to have a go at writing the other two paragraphs, I'd be very, very interested to see them. You can just post them in the comments. Have I mentioned so far, I'm also doing a first language revision masterclass in April and March. 2 live video lessons a week, and I will mark your work. If you're interested, the link is in the description for that. Okay, so my first paragraph is about education and hypocrisy. So I'm going to say, so far I've got schools teachers to be environmentally aware students who reuse water bottles and recycle paper, ... Why shouldn't the same be true for our school building? Reminding students to use blue recycle bins while destroying a 3-storey building seems like the height of hypocrisy. Is this the lesson you want to teach to your children? So again, I've got this idea of us, I am a student. I've got this idea of like recycling or reusing from the articles. This part here would class as evaluation, as with the hypocrisy. And I've also got a reminder that my audience, they're local citizens, they're not school children. So I'm referring to your children to make it sound like, you know, you're an adult. As well as a rhetorical question right here too. Oh, 2 rhetorical questions. So I'm going to go 2 rhetorical questions, and I've also got 2 bits of evaluation, all related back to ideas from the text. So the other side I might argue, like, because the topic of this is education, so I might go like creativity, because that first article mentioned like new buildings can be very, very creative. What did it say? About weird and wonderful modern buildings in natural shapes. Cities are not museums, living and evolving centres. So, okay, those are the ideas that I'm going to do related to education to counter-argue this side. So my counter argument is, of course, modern buildings can stimulate creativity, a vital skill for any student. Notice my nice punctuation here, and how I'm relating everything back to being a student. So perhaps Knightsbridge could learn something from this and keep referencing the school. The building, if rebuilt, could be jointly designed by students and city planners to teach students about the artistic process as well as inspire them every day. So now I've got my counter argument, and I want to wrap up my paragraph by like a kind of evaluative final comment comparing both ideas. So overall, I think it's this idea of like a middle ground. I mean, we've got the evaluation of don't be a hypocrite. If we recycle water bottles, we should recycle our school. And then we've also got evaluation here of actually imagination is really important for students, and so therefore like rebuilding the buildings could develop that vital skill. So evaluation. But overall, I think this idea of a middle ground of, you know, weighing up the cost versus the benefit, and is there a way to do both at the same time? So So now my like summarising / evaluative point where I'm weighing up both sides, I say, yet complete destruction isn't needed to practice this skill of creativity. Why not save the building by redesigning classrooms with modern principles while preserving the historic facade of the building? Redesign the classrooms, keep the outside, the historic part the same. Total destruction isn't needed, just a simple tweak of inside designs, or interior designs, I think sounds better. So this idea of like we can find a balance somewhere in the middle, that would be evaluation. So we can save the outside while redesigning the classrooms. Like we don't need total destruction, we can just tweak what needs to be tweaked. That there would also be evaluation. Okay, and that's where we've got up to for today. If you would like to have a go at writing the other 2 paragraphs, remember that those topics were about the cost and finances or the benefits to the students in terms of their learning, comfort and safety. you can go ahead and try to write those in the comment section for me. Don't forget to keep that sense of audience, that you are a student talking to a live room full of adults. You currently attend the school. What's your school called? If you're stuck, just keep it as Knightsbridge. That has got a beautiful historic building that many people in the town went to and they're very, very proud of. So keep using those collective pronouns like we and our. Keep talking about you as a student and keep applying all of the points in these articles back to this idea of school or students. If you have any questions, just comment down below. And don't forget that you can find more like this on my website, taughtly.co.uk. There's a link just in case you can't find it. And don't forget that you can register your interest to form a self-formed group. If you've got a little group of friends that want to come do a group class with me, let me know. If you want to do one-to-one tutoring, very heavily booked at the minute, but get yourself on the wait list to be first in line. And I have got my revision masterclasses coming up for IGCSE First Language English. They start in March, finish in April. It's 18 live hourly lessons with me, 2 per week, plus a piece of marked homework every single week. So more details about that in the YouTube comments if you are interested. Hopefully I will see you guys in my next video. Good luck and happy studying. See you next time.